a better Sri Lanka?
They increase the interest and they are trying to grab the money to the bank.
Crisis is a common word today. Everybody are talking about the crisis, how we can get out of this crisis.
Today we have with us Member of Parliament and former State Minister of Finance, Mr. Eran Wickramaratne. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
So the reason we are here today is to have a discussion on the Federal Bank's decision to increase the interest rate to Sri Lanka and how would it impact us in the future and now.
So in the US, inflation is becoming a problem and therefore they have decided to put up the Fed rates. It's been going on over the last few months and the Fed rates have gone up about 3%. I think it might continue to go up over the next few months as well because they are targeting the inflation and that's very important. And it's almost strange to talk about it because US inflation was near zero and they're targeting it to be under 2%. And you have countries like Sri Lanka in which we are talking about food inflation near 100 and general inflation probably 60-70%. So it's also worrisome. So what happens is when they put the interest, target inflation, they put the interest rates up, capital flows into the US and it leaves other countries, particularly developing countries like ours. So this is going to be a challenge for Sri Lanka. We anyway have a challenge on our hands. We are bankrupt, we don't have the dollars. If investment dollars come in to some extent, we could mitigate it. But in what's happening now in the US, the flow is into the US and that flow will continue. So we have a man-made crisis in our country, which our governments are responsible for the crisis we have by poor management, right, that we have really lost our dollars. Now we're trying to reverse it. And now the international situation is also going to have a bearing on us.
Thank you very much for taking your time from your busy schedule and spending some moments with us and for your valuable input. Thank you so much.
Welcome to another discussion about the crisis in Sri Lanka. How we are getting out of this crisis and what are the reasons for this crisis?
It is now very well known that Western countries are now undergoing kind of a recession. Right, it's because of the pandemic plus Russia-Ukraine war created kind of a energy crisis there in Europe, and very high inflation created a lot of problems for the Europeans and North Americans. To address this high inflation, American Federal Bank, US Federal Bank actually raised their interest rates to attract more dollars to their treasury. So all over the world, there's a trend now, the dollars are going back to US Treasury. So creating huge problems to the other countries. And as far as Sri Lanka is concerned, now Sri Lanka is facing huge scarcity of dollars. Our net foreign asset value is around -6 billion. So we badly need dollars to buy our essentials like medicinal drugs, food, fertilizer, fuel, coal and various other items. Unfortunately, we should borrow this money from the international markets and international markets are now crumbling. So Sri Lankan crisis is because of this US interest rate hike, but because of this crisis will be worsening.
Thank you very much for joining us for the discussion. That was Mr. Patali Champika Ranawaka, well-known senior politician, former minister and currently he is a member of the parliament and he is the chairman of the Parliament Economic Stabilization Committee. We would like to meet you with another discussion to talk about the crisis in Sri Lanka and solutions for the current crisis in Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka can address its problem, deal with its problem.
Welcome for another discussion about the crisis in Sri Lanka today. So many questions to ask about the crisis, but my first question is the impact of the Fed's interest rate hike on Sri Lanka. What do you think about that?
In fact, the impact of this decision taken by the Federal Reserves of US would be immense to many countries in the world. especially to developing countries, in that way to Sri Lanka as well. So how is it going to impact is mainly US has its own problem. So these problems, and as you just mentioned, the crises are not exceptional to the system, because they are really inherent in these economic policies. From time to time it happens. The points one by one. The main impact would be a tendency to have huge capital outflows. Of course, being a small country, Sri Lanka, we do not have such huge foreign investment. But whatever the possibilities that we have to attract foreign investment towards the expansion of capital formation of the country, especially to the capital market, would be a dream, like, so would be highly threatened. The reason is they can have high interests there. So therefore, that the threat is there. On the other hand, we should not forget the fact that the country Sri Lanka is in a huge economic crisis. Of them, the major problem is the inability to pay our foreign debts. So everyone knows now, so government is in discussions with IMF and taking.
Thank you very much for joining us, Professor. So I hope that people who are responsible in power and all that will take part and will take place, take another step to resolve this problem. Thank you very much for your valuable time.
Thank you very much. It was my great pleasure. So hope that we would contribute more for these kind of discussions in the future. Thank you.